You are now in the Backcourt, a Brooklyn Nets podcast presented by Ticketmaster. And after a very short break, almost no break at all, after the regular season, we're back. I'm Lucas Kaplan, writer for NetsDaily, host of Nets Film Focus, and many other things on the internet, basketball related. And of course, joining me is Sarah Kustok for episode number 26 of the Backcourt. Some off-season player reviews. Sarah, how are we feeling?
Good, good. Yeah, you said it. I mean, we're back. Don't get sick of us yet. We're still here.
No, we have
Back
to
like we never
recap.
left.
We have to recap what just happened. We have to talk about these 82 games. And though it was a 26 and 56 season, there were a lot of individual positives, and that's I think what you want to see from a young team, a team in a new direction, especially starting that new direction. So Sarah, is there anyone? I gave you some names. Is there anyone you'd like to start off with? I have a lot of notes written down for all these
You do
guys.
have a lot of notes. I appreciate that about you, Lucas. One and the same. We are one and the same. Let's start with Day'Ron Sharpe.
Awesome.
You've
Awesome.
just wrote a tremendous article about him. And I'm actually going to flip it around. I'm curious to hear some of your initial thoughts and recap on what we saw out of him this year.
Well, I think, yes, that article, thank you for bringing that up, is on Nets Daily. And he is, important to note, restricted free agent. He spoke very glowingly of Brooklyn in his exit interview.
Yeah.
We hope he's back. I hope he's back. I enjoy talking to him.
Yeah.
But here, give me a more specific question. Like what is his number one skill? What stands out? Big improvement.
What I would wanna know, know, because I do know you have a lot of notes,
Hmm.
obviously, he had missed the early part of the season,
Yes.
and with that injury, that he suffered during preseason, and I'm curious what you thought his biggest growth point, and you could look at it by the numbers, you can look at it by the eye test, but in his 4th year, he mentioned just, kind of the situation in terms of circumstance of decision making on him. What did he show you, maybe even more towards the latter part of the season as well, that stood out most of things that really made you optimistic about his trajectory?
Yeah, I think overall the defense, just because it feels like this season they found, and credit to Jordy and credit to Day'Ron, obviously, they found kind of his defensive future in the NBA. If the first 2 years there were questions, can he survive and drop? He's only 6'9", technique is okay, not great. This year he played up the floor. He applied a lot of pressure on pick and rolls, and yet he also improved a lot at the traditional big man stuff. And so all of that kind of added up to this big guy off the bench who can play a variety of coverages, isn't so matchup dependent. Like he can switch, he can play drop, he can do all these things to now we know he can offensive rebound. But I thought the defense reached not just survivable, but legitimately good, often great. And I do have some numbers here, as you said. He had, per basketball reference, 2.3 steal rate and a 4.6 block rate. And he didn't qualify for end of season leaderboards, but those would both be top 15 in the NBA as a whole, which just means when he's trapping and hedging and playing up the floor, he's getting his hands on passes, he's creating havoc. The Nets defense tried to force turnovers this year, and when he was on the floor, he was a big part of that. The 4.6 block rate also shows me he can get back to the paint, he can protect the rim, and he can do the traditional stuff that you need, which just shows me no matter what you want to do on defense, Day'Ron can do it. And maybe he has a coverage that he's better at, but just the defensive improvement, in addition to just, fourth year stuff, like he's better, he just knows the game more, blah, blah, blah. But that to me is the one thing I would point out. And I've, a lot of numbers, like the ones I just mentioned. And I'm assuming you watching courtside, physicality, he's talked about being in better shape. I'm assuming that matches the eye test because from where I'm sitting, it definitely did.
And that's something that I think we've seen him dedicate himself to, even in particular after his rookie year. But every offseason, the understanding of how much work that he's put in and how he can continue to grow into being a true pro. And I think that's the conditioning, the diet, all of those things you see from him I would also say too, the defense is a huge thing. I think his understanding of the scheme of the system, his movements on it, communication with it, communication to his teammates when he's
Mm-hmm.
on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Offensively, I thought there was certain things in that final stretch of the season, whether it was his vision in passing, how the Nets were able to utilize him in some parts of playing through him. I think he's got a good feel for that. I think he has a better his improving his feel for spacing on the floor. I think early on, and you still see it at times, but early on, the timing on screens and playing that pick and
Yeah.
roll and picking up foul, like it was one of those things of just constantly picking up fouls of how and that's all, there's a lot of things you're acclimating yourself to officiating what that looks like, but I felt like his timing and his angles and his understanding of screening took a big jump. And I
It's a
think the
great.
totality then of how he was functioning offensively, the offense itself, really impressed me. And that's, to me, those are the nuances of, okay, there's certain things. One, you can't, his rebounding, his offensive rebounding, we
Mm-hmm.
talked about that. There's some things that just guys have excellent instincts and timing, but that to me felt like a development and a learning point that could even continue to grow more and more, especially with the players then that he'd be playing with.
I love that you mentioned the screening because some of my like the notes watching games I was most excited to write were like Day'Ron like flips a screen, like really good screening angle because coming out of UNC, he was kind of, a lot of people higher on him in the draft were like, hey, this guy has some short roll passing ability, maps the floor
Hmm.
well. And we didn't really see a ton of that his first 3 years. A lot of that was just he didn't get to play in systems that had a lot of that action going on. But this year, first time he's handling the ball on the perimeter and kind of handoffs, fake handoffs, rescreening, stuff like that, hitting back cuts. And you could see him progress, as you said, over the season, and he ends up every assist, turnover, all those numbers are career highs. And even the mistakes, like, were encouraging. Like, okay, this action is going to have a slip cut to the basket. And I'm going to try to hit it, but maybe he telegraphed it and it was a turnover. But it was all good process. And, the offensive understanding really jumped out at me, like you said. And then beyond that, it's like there's that not really quantifiable thing aside from, the rebounding numbers of this dude just makes plays. This dude just has an energy. And there were so many moments this year where you felt it. I don't know if any games or matchups or plays even stick out to you.
Yes, and I can't believe that I'm have it in the top of my head and I'm blanking. What was the game latter part of the season that he started
Oh,
when Nick
OKC.
was, yeah,
Played OKC.
and there was just so many tremendous aspects of that game of what I was talking about, the screening, the angles,
Mm-hmm.
timing, the rebounding, the passing and vision, mapping the floor, what he was doing defensively, communication. It felt like he took on that ownership of, I know that the team needs me in a very significant way tonight. And he was locked in and delivered in very big ways. And I think those to me more so, we talked a lot about this season and what it looks like for Brooklyn and how you're categorizing what success is. And it's not necessarily going to be evaluations of wins and losses. Those are the games to me that you pull from that you're like, all right, this isn't a throwaway thing.
No.
And that in particular was a good to me pivot point of, yeah, there's things you see that give you a ton of optimism of a next step that can be taken.
Yeah, and Chet and Hartenstein played in that game. And you had this thing where, okay, Day'Ron solidified his floor as an NBA player. You know he can play in a rotation. You know he's going to give you value. But now it's like, well, he's getting 30 minutes tonight against a good team, and he's showing flashes of more. And, I think a lot of his stats that I'm mentioning probably helped by the fact that he only averaged 18 minutes. He can play a little harder in short stints. That's fine. But when you play 32 minutes against a good team and you put up 25, 15, 5 assists,
Oh
two
yeah, you
steals,
got
three
it.
blocks, like it's not, I know it's a 1 game sample size, but it's not a fluke. I'll say that. That was an awesome game. The Nets were insanely 12 points better per 100 possessions when he was
Wow.
on the floor.
See, yeah.
And he had no lineup consistency. His most played lineup this year played only 65 possessions together. It was, you'll never guess it, so I won't even do the fake trivia thing. Killian Hayes, Keon Johnson, Cam Johnson, Zaire Williams. That was his
No,
most
no,
frequent lineup.
no chance I would have guessed that. So
I don't
thank
think
you.
so. And yet still consistent impact. So that I say all that to say he had a great season. I would say the one point of emphasis going forward is still finishing on the interior. He had career best numbers on floaters and hooks, that push shot. He shot 76% from the line, big improvement, but still low 60s at the rim. I don't know if you see like what goes into improving that. Is it just experience and
Yeah, I think
yeah,
part. Yeah, I think it is. I think it's because you know that he could do it, but I think it's experience. I think it's again like it goes back to the small things of just your strength and your body and conditioning. And as he continues to develop and just a better understanding too of the league and players and personnel and what that looks like and what defensive schemes look like, all of those things. But I think overall, you said it early on. He was certainly was a big bright spot of a
yeah.
takeaway of what this year was.
Huge, huge. He ends up missing the first 21 games, playing the next 50, missing the final 11, and averaging about 9, 8, 8, 7, and 2 on 52% from the floor, 76% from the line. And probably, made himself some money this offseason and just is taking huge steps in advancing his NBA career. I wanted to touch on Tyrese Martin's season and another really positive growth story for the Brooklyn Nets. Jordy Fernandez was asked at his exit interview kind of to reflect on the season, a pretty general question. And he said, these wins that we had this year that were not just scoreboard wins, for example, Keon Johnson becoming a rotation player. We'll talk about him. Second name he said, Tyrese Martin. I asked him to play point guard at the end of the season. I threw him in all these different situations and he responded, really well. So what stood out to you about Tyrese Martin, who had only played 16 NBA games prior to this year and became a valuable piece in the rotation?
Um, uh, I think to your point of saying that they only played 16 NBA games, yet there was not a moment he stepped on the floor at any juncture from the beginning of the season to the end of the season that it did not look like one, he belonged, and two, he had the poise and composure and experience of having been there. And I that to me was more of a rarity of what you've seen out of players experiencing their and it's not to say there was no mistakes or there's not certain areas in stretches ebbs and flows throughout the
Yeah.
season. And I think too just the disposition, like his disposition on top of we can get into the numbers and the production and the skill set, his disposition to me is what I think will keep him here and has established him as an NBA player. He's so level-headed. He's consistent in being in the right places, showing up in the right way. And I think just his like to me, it was a fun story to watch. You think about the
Very.
backdoor sitting there in preseason training camp and he's fighting for a two-way contract. And then to think about just the point of where he's at when you finish the season. I know we talked a lot about our favorite moments of the season in the last episode, and that's that stretch, that West Coast stretch of Sacramento, Golden State, Phoenix, and his 30-point game in Phoenix. Nothing about it, though, if you looked at him and watched him, felt like it was out of the ordinary, and that the moment was too big. And those are the things to me that stood out of just the type of player that he is. And I think anytime most of you'd say this about these guys in the league, but just feeling like you belong and you earn this time, you deserve this time, and make the most of every time you step on the floor. That's what I appreciate most when you're watching someone play.
And I don't think that's an easy thing to do. It's easy to believe it, maybe. You made it to the NBA. You're an NBA player. You got to be pretty crazy good to do that. But he had only played in 16 games and he wasn't even in the rotation. By the way, an early highlight of the Backcourt podcast, I distinctly remember this, was I went to that West Coast trip where the Nets beat Sacramento, Golden State, and then Phoenix. And we recorded early the morning after they beat Golden State. And in our Brooklyn's Next Nets segment, you can look this up. I don't know what
Oh, I can't
episode
wait.
it was. You said, yeah, next Nets, Tyrese Martin. He had only played, I think, I'm looking at it right now, 35 total minutes up to that point on the whole season. Some garbage time, whatever. And you said, I don't know, preseason I heard good things, training camp I heard good things, and his minutes, it's looking pretty good. I said, okay, that's a good shout. 2 days later, they go to Phoenix. He scores 30 points. He makes 8 threes, and he is probably the main reason they win that game. So that was
Lucas, this is why my partner, my guy, this is why you're the best for remembering things like that.
maybe you need to be
Um,
in the front office. I don't know. That was a pretty. Maybe we will.
um, no, but that's I think that's the point of in
Yeah.
yeah, of the time he stepped on the floor for the first time. In every others, he looked like he belonged and was meant to be
hmm
there, and he showed that.
Most important numbers for me, and obviously numbers reflecting film and all that. 38%, just under 38% on catch and shoot threes. Took them with aplomb. Is going to need to. Made enough of them. Numbers slightly lower than that. Overall, Jordy put the ball in his hands, ran some pick and roll, experimented. He's only 6'5". He's going to need to do some ball handling to really be a mainstay in a rotation. He showed some real positives like getting to the rim. He shot 71% at the rim, just crafty, under control. He's not the most explosive guy, but he's pretty strong and balanced, and he made some really impressive like kick out passes with his left hand, creating open threes for guys. Obviously going to need to work on like the in-between game, the floater, kind of some counters, but for a guy that was a career G Leaguer mostly for 2 years to get all this NBA experience and to play really well, just a major positive. And I'm looking at it right now. He's non-guaranteed for next year, but Nets guarantee him he could be back. He certainly made an impression in Brooklyn, and again, might have really stabilized an NBA career, found an NBA career for himself. I feel like I don't even need to ask you favorite Tyrese moment from the season. It's the
No,
30
that's it.
point.
It
Yeah.
is, and yeah, and obviously it feels like an easy thing to say.
hmm
With the numbers. I would also say, and I can't specifically remember the games or the game, um, but I feel like there were certain games or moments, and this was characteristic of how he play of getting on the floor, a
hmm
50-50 play, a hustle play. Like we could talk about a
Yeah.
lot of
Right.
his numbers of shooting, which are really important, but I feel like he did the dirty work as well. And again, my mind, I should have it all here with me, but there was certain pivot points in games where I feel like the timeliness of shots that he made
hmm
and the timeliness of plays were game-winning plays, and that to me then puts you in a box of a game-winning type of player, and that's something that is obviously of huge value.
Definitely. Kind of reminds me of Tyler Johnson, who shot 35% from three for the Nets that one year, but like felt like it was like 90% and made every big shot. Utmost compliment. Loved that guy. So yeah, Tyrese Martin and Day'Ron Sharpe, two really strong Nets this season, real positives. Loved covering them. Hope they're back next year. But regardless, A+ grades. Not the whole grading thing, but great to watch them. And this has been a little mini episode of the Backcourt presented by Ticketmaster. Get into these player reviews this season, as always, joined by Sarah Kustok. It's been great. Like, subscribe, rate us, all that stuff. And we're going to keep pumping them out. So, see you guys next time.